Hello and welcome to this PriceBeam webinar. My name is Finn Hansen. I'm one of the co-founders at PriceBeam. I'm very excited today to have with me Barry Edney, who is in my opinion, a leader in pricing and price optimization in the B2B space, and definitely also a very active participant in the pricing community on LinkedIn and other channels. So welcome to the webinar, Barry. It's a pleasure to have you.
Yeah, thank you for inviting me. Good to be here.
I'm curious to how you ended up in pricing.
That was a roundabout way. It was a case of be careful what you wish for. I joined, actually, it was Accent Bell very many years ago. After leaving PPG, I went to Accent Bell and they asked me to take a look at their product portfolio and set up the export markets from Australia to New Zealand. And that
Hmm.
involved pricing. And I started looking at the pricing in Australia and I said, this is nuts. It's just broken. It just doesn't work. And they said, well, fix it then. So, with my knowledge of marketing and experience, and some reading and some study and some perseverance and a little bit of help from the headquarters in the Netherlands, I put this price, restructured all the pricing, got everything reset, and started getting success on the back of that.
Hmm.
And about a year later, they hired McKinsey to come in and look and give them some guidance about how to optimize and manage pricing going forward. And they did a deep dive on the pricing we had in Australia and New Zealand. And they said, oh, you're fine. We've got bigger problems. You've done a good job. Bye. And that was really my first exposure to pricing. And from there, I took on commercial leadership, then moved to Asia, leading marketing and commercial activities there, which involved pricing. I established a pricing team in Asia. And from there, I ended up doing more and more commercial excellence. That taught me that there's a lot to be gained from the execution, not just the number on the invoice. Yeah, so I've been involved in pricing and margin optimization ever since, really.
Hmm. Hmm. And you are specializing in B2B, right? More in how to manage
Yeah, that's
B2B
right.
pricing.
I have done some quite a bit of B2B2C and a
Hmm.
little
Hmm.
bit of B2C, but mostly
Yeah.
it's B2B. That's
Hmm.
I guess my background, where my familiarity is. It's what I'm most familiar with and most comfortable with.
Sure, sure.
So any manufacturers selling through distribution or large distribution companies usually is my most common customer.
Hmm. And what's either more difficult or more easy in B2B pricing? What's the secret
Um,
sauce in B2B?
Well, I think one of the most difficult things is explaining or getting the understanding, the buy-in, that building a brand, building a reputation is just as important in B2B as it is
Hmm.
in B2C, because wholesalers are supplying customers that have choice, and
Mm.
they're going to buy from the trusted supplier. So that's all about the true elements of brand. Um, who do they feel they can trust as a partner and a supplier? Um, the other thing I find, perhaps the frustration, and you and I have touched on this before, is the lack of willingness for most B2Bs to actually invest in research and
Hmm.
actually get objective views on what they're doing and what their competitors are doing in the marketplace.
Hmm.
Too often they rely on the feedback from their own sales teams and sales organizations. And funny enough, somebody posted on LinkedIn earlier today that just leaves you open to your inbuilt biases, confirmation bias and all those other things that we all carry with us. So unless you can get some uh, prepared to get some objective research, you won't really get to the bottom of what it is you're trying to understand.
Hmm. Hmm. I, I guess one of the problems is that sales may be not always objective enough in terms of what you should be pricing or what's
Um,
possible in the marketplace, or maybe not even trained. I mean, I don't know.
No, I mean, I think that there's two elements there really. It's how the sales organization operates, and
Hmm.
it is changing a lot. Obviously, it has to change because organizations are evolving. Early in my career, typical B2B sales organization was, you know, um, middle-aged guy, been in the role for 20 plus years, perhaps a former technician, knows the
Hmm.
technology very well,
Yeah.
and relied very much on relationships
Hmm.
and negotiation.
Hmm.
And when you're trying to ask that person to implement a price increase, it's almost like you're asking him to pay for it himself because it's his friend that you're asking for more money from. Uh, Fast forward to today, and that's very different. You have some established sales people, but there's a lot of online sales and there's a lot of remote support for sales, and there's
Mm.
a lot of engagement between end client and the supplier, in the virtual world. And so that changes the dynamic, but the same challenge is still there. The value still has to be explained, the value still has
Mhm.
to be justified in order to optimize that price. And when there's a close relationship um, with a customer, or if the customer feels confident to push back, then we have to give our people or the sales organization confidence to be able to manage that. And
Mhm.
often we don't give them that training, we don't give them that resource,
Mhm.
so they can confidently say, yes, but this is why the price has changed, or this is why the price
Mm.
is what the price is.
Mm. So what's the toolbox you would typically apply in B2B, or a range of tools you would apply in B2B
Well, as you say,
pricing?
it's a toolbox. I think it's very important to really understand the pricing strategy.
Hmm.
And often, I'll ask businesses when I first engage them, "Do you have a pricing strategy?" And pretty much everybody nods their head. But I ask them, "Is it written down and is it clearly articulated amongst the organization?"
Hmm.
And then I see a lot of people thinking,
Yeah.
because it's not really defined. And of course, in a lot of situations when there's pressure on achieving numbers, at the end of quarter or half year or year, the strategy goes out the window when the volume target's been missed.
Hmm.
So how do you then uh, drive volume on using price as a lever without messing up your complete strategy or
Hmm.
ignoring your strategy? So you need things like promotional activity, incentives that aren't pure price that you can undo quickly
Hmm.
at the end of that pressure period, shall we say? So one of the tools is really understanding and I always try and encourage customers to revisit value propositions because value
Hmm.
propositions change over time.
Hmm.
Customer competitor offers, I should say, change. Customers' requirements change. So what was good value today might not necessarily be as good value next week when there are other alternatives around or the requirements change. So constantly revisit the value propositions, constantly provide latest information to support those value propositions. Uh, Communication on prices and price changes is essential,
Hmm.
and the new and innovation of product, bring new products, new solutions, um, and really fine tune the product lifecycle management. Because if you introduce new products without managing the exit of the old products, you'll have a tail of products that just sunk money, and then you start discounting those to get rid of them, and then your
Hmm.
new products don't sell, and it's
Yeah.
a vicious circle.
Hmm. So is there, is it your experience that there are more tools, like software tools in B2B than, for example, B2C? I mean, if we go on the websites of all the big pricing software vendors, I don't want to highlight anyone specific, but like Pros or
There are
Cylinder,
many out there.
Vendavo, Price FX, so there are quite a few, right?
Yeah,
They, maybe it's my perception, but they seem to cater a bit more to B2B than classical consumer pricing, at least.
I think they
Is
do.
Yeah.
I mean, again, it's in the execution. It's how well you implement. Now, I have one potential client I'm talking to that works with one of those vendors, and they don't use the optimization engine.
Right.
They just, but what they have done is move from a team of many people crunching
Hmm.
numbers in through their BI system and Excel
Mm.
to pressing a button in the tool, and in half an hour they get all the analysis and they can see where they're underperforming, where they're performing well.
Hmm.
In the space of an hour or so, they can generate what information they need to generate and
Hmm.
can react to it and
Yeah.
make reasoned decisions. Now, whether they would invest in the engine optimization engine in the future is still open because they're happy with what they're getting. They feel they're
Mm.
getting good value from that
Hmm.
because it's taken away the workload of all these people they had crunching numbers and
Yeah.
also increased the speed. So
Mm.
they do have value. Other businesses as a food distribution business, there was a quite a well-known case study for one of the major software companies. They did put the recommendation engine in, and a lot of resistance from the sales force to start with. But once it was accepted, um, the uh, the results were quite outstanding, and that was because the initial reaction from the sales people were, um, well, we don't want this black box to tell us what to do.
Mhm.
Um, but then, of course, they know they're under constant pressure to improve margins. So
Yeah.
when they're getting a recommendation that does actually work, they're thinking, oh, okay, I'm no longer the bad guy in front of my customer.
Mhm. Mhm.
That's the company and the system. And,
Mhm.
so they started to get a bit more understanding of how they could use it to improve their situation. So to
Mhm.
answer your question, is it more prevalent in B2B and B2C? I don't think they are. I think most of the online systems we see have a pricing engine in the background. Um, I think we was more aware of them because they're not quite so automated in B2B.
Mhm.
There's
Mhm.
more interventions, as I say, in one case
Mhm.
where they only take the analysis and the outputs, and the other example they use the full suite of tools available,
Mhm. Mhm.
and I think you'll see that a lot across B2B.
Mhm. But I guess you can also get a lot of wins fairly quickly if you introduce tools that may not be software driven, but rather just is let's call it common business sense, like a price waterfall analysis or
Yeah,
simply
exactly. I
starting
mean,
looking at the waterfall, right?
yeah, I'm a big that's where usually my start point. So before I start looking at what should we work on, my
Hmm.
piece of analysis usually looks at waterfall and then back to the product portfolio.
Hmm.
Um, where's the margin being generated? Where's it being lost? And any pricing waterfall you'll see will have all the column elements. It will have, cost of goods, rebates and discounts, and it will have, variable selling costs and all these things.
Hmm.
The one thing it won't have in there is margin leaks.
Right.
And because nobody actually admits to having margin leaks. It's in the waterfall, it's captured. Well, actually, no, it's not.
Mm.
Which of those, how much of that discounts and rebates column is actually leaky? How much could you reduce that by if you
Hmm.
tighten the leaks?
Yeah.
Um, and there is a lot. There is a
Hmm.
lot. You know, as I said right at the very beginning, it's all down to the execution.
Hmm.
And I guess my focus on that area is from my background, as I explained, started on pricing and commercial excellence. That's where if you do things well, you'll achieve a whole lot more than you will by spending an endless resource trying to get that just perfect price.
Hmm. 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 Where do the biggest margin leaks normally sit on the waterfall? Is my perception is that it sits more towards the end than in the beginning, but I don't know.
Yeah, it is. Usually most pricing models start with good intentions,
Hmm.
clear. Well, we really need to generate this much margin. This product adds value, so we can get better margin with this one. That's usually really mostly understood. Maybe they could push the value envelope a little bit, but generally speaking, it's understood. Where it falls down is things like rebates, poorly
Hmm.
administered, poorly honored, um, particularly in the multinationals.
Hmm.
For example, I was asked to sign off a deal with I can't name the company I was working for at the time, but
Sure.
I'm sure many could guess. I was asked to sign off a deal, a rebate deal for a market, and this deal was for a automotive business,
Hmm.
and we needed to gain a technical approval from the global HQ to be able to be listed on their approved vendor list. And uh, so what the country they did their analysis and said, look, the margin's great, let's sign it off. But when I went back to look at this particular customer, there was a margin at the country level um, to be supplied. There was sorry, a rebate as
Hmm.
well as obviously local margin, but there was rebate
Sure.
to the country organization. There was a rebate at the regional level
Right.
to the regional parts supervisor, and there
Hmm.
was a rebate to global HQ for the technical approval.
Hmm.
So which weren't connected. So
Yeah.
this was a case of rebates not being fully understood and fully transparent and fully correct.
Hmm.
Um, Another area of rebates that I see as a leak is what I call lazy rebates. So a rebate that is offered for, oh well, if you spend 3% more than you did last year, then that's your
Mm.
new target for next year.
Yeah.
Well, of course, if you've got a rebate target based on value in a
Hmm.
high inflation market, then you're probably rewarding the purchase of less volume.
Hmm.
So I'm a big fan of more strategic behavior changing rebates.
Hmm.
Either steer them towards a particular product you want them to buy,
Hmm.
target a share of wallet,
Yeah.
um, change the way they process or they submit orders. For example, instead of multiple small shipments, fewer larger shipments, which helps your cost to serve because your freight costs go down, your
Hmm.
picking costs and warehousing costs go down. So it's a benefit for you. There's lots of things like that you can do where these margin leaks operate.
Hmm.
Um, it's interesting where by working with the customers you can and talking to them and actually talking beyond the product and
Hmm.
actually talking about how can we add value beyond product, you can uncover these opportunities.
Mm, mm. You think it's more of a system issue that many companies can't manage this across borders, or is it more of a training issue, or is it a common language? You said you wanted to have some returns for your rebates, which I would consider almost like a language, right? You want to we're giving
It
rebates
is.
because we get
It's
something in return. Where is it? Let's say just simple engineering to get it better, and where is it the art and science of pricing? Is it?
yeah. It's. I mean, I think it's a sum of all the above. I mean, you do have a cultural thing in some organizations, less so these days, I have to say.
Hmm.
Um, but certainly in some organizations, the pricing team do what they do, sales team do what they do, supply chain do what they do,
Mm.
outbound supply do what they do. And I often say, pricing is a team sport. Everybody has to
Hmm.
be involved. You have to know
Mm.
what's going on across the board. And it without that collaboration and that
Hmm.
cooperation, you can't optimize. Um, and that's really the fundamental of commercial excellence. It's every department working together in sync, not separately.
Hmm.
Um, in lean production, there's a term that I like, which is called a production process should be a optimum series, not a series of optimums, and that's
Hmm.
true of business systems and processes. It should be an optimum series, not a series of optimums.
Hmm. So, what challenges are there if I'm managing a global or at least international pricing organization? I mean, you mentioned a little bit about just even being able to capture it all, but there must be some other challenges as well.
Oh, there is. There's a in any market there's a market level for a product or a service,
Hmm.
and there's an acceptance level for it. And when you have a multinational business selling across borders, then and particularly when some countries put more regulation in than another, then their costs go up, but their market price perception hasn't changed, and you can't really charge more.
Hmm.
Across Europe, of course, they could just go across the border and buy the product and ship it back. It would,
Yeah.
yeah. So that becomes very, very difficult to manage. It has to be that all that's going to happen is that prices will level up over time if they haven't already,
Hmm.
and you'll see a European price. Um, but there are systems and processes you can put in place to manage the admin of it
Hmm.
in ERP systems. So many companies trying to manage it with separate prices um, and separate prices, I should say, per market. One experience I had a few years ago, the organization had a separate price list for each market, um, but with a different discount structure to make the outcome look about the same.
Okay.
Um, but so every time that a price increase, every single market had to go through that process of analysis and calculation and decision making.
Hmm.
So I said, why not systemize it, put it all in the ERP system, Oh, our ERP system can't do that. Well, actually, it can. You just have to invest some time in some configuration and some smart guys, and get it done. And it's just painful work to do. But once you've done it, it makes it automated, and you save an awful lot of grief, an awful lot of time, and you avoid the errors,
Hmm. Hmm. Hmm.
which is where the margin leaks are.
Hmm. Is there a big cultural difference in how different? I mean, I know that's very stereotypical, but are there certain ways that Europeans or Americans or Australians approach pricing and revenue growth?
I don't not so much these days.
Hmm.
I think in the US market, they're more likely to go to a technical IT solution than
Hmm.
not.
Yeah.
I think they're more willing to do that.
Hmm.
Um, there's still a lot across the US. There's still a lot of old school sales teams.
Hmm.
A lot of businesses, particularly in the more less populous regions, they will hire portfolio salespeople who
Hmm.
work purely on commission,
Mm.
and they have a price range or a floor that they can sell at,
Yeah.
and that's what they're left to. So there's a little bit more, a lot more sales person control, which is a challenge for some of these price recommendation engines. Although the softwares are very successful in the US, so obviously they do have their place.
Hmm.
Um, Across Europe, I think there's too much of a reliance on Excel in most organizations now. So used to just running analysis on Excel and implementing on the back of that
Hmm.
that why do we need software? Yeah,
Mm.
and
Mm.
and two or three of the software manufacturers, and I deal with most of them at various times, will say to me, our biggest competitor is not the other software manufacturer, it's Microsoft with Excel.
Yeah. 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 No, I think from experience that applies both to B2B and for that matter also in B2B, B2C organizations, right?
Yeah.
Excel is easy and it does certain things obviously quite well, but especially once you want to scale or compare between countries, it's very
Mm.
often difficult to manage.
It is very clunky, and the challenge, of course, with Excel is, there's no version or very limited version control, no
Mm.
audit trail.
Yeah.
Um, you know, if an auditor comes into a business, they can look at the ERP system and see, well,
Hmm.
I can see that the pricing was changed in the ERP system on this date, and it was approved by this person. But who actually approved the price that was entered into the ERP system?
Mm. Mm.
Where's the sign off on that?
Hmm.
Um, and that question can rarely be answered. There's no
Hmm.
there lacks a transparency and control when you're
Mm.
sending Excels around the organization to get agreement and then or consensus, then agreement,
Hmm.
and then sign off.
Yeah. In my experience from when we do or when companies are either B2B, pure B2B or B2B to C, which is actually most of them, right? So when we talk about consumer goods sold in the supermarket, it's still we sometimes forget it's actually a B2B transaction to begin with into the retailer before it's a consumer product. Very often I find that especially around the rebates, but also the discounts, they still sit very loose. Um, any ideas, advice, suggestions on if I have a discounting problem in my organization, what should I focus on first? Are there some low-hanging fruits or are there some?
Yeah, I mean, excessive discounts are the bane of, again, one of those margin leaks. What's the right discount? What's too much? What's too little? Um, it really comes down to policy and enforcement and within the organization.
Hmm.
One of the things I will do with really, but it does depend on the situation, of course. One of the suggestions I would make where the feeling is that the pricing is fine, but the discount's too excessive, is I will reduce the authority of the salespeople, or
Hmm.
recommend that they reduce the authority of the salespeople to give discount, and make sure that's an escalation and
Hmm.
change the authority level. The salespeople need some flexibility. Um, but there's that part of the equation. But the other part is, what do you incentive the sales team on? Is
Hmm.
it on purely on volume, or
Hmm.
is it on margin generation?
Yeah.
Now, if you switch that around and focus purely on margin generation, you'll probably find your volumes will go down. And then the factory's saying, hang on a minute, we can't, because we're reducing volume, our production costs are going up. What's going on? So our per unit production costs are going up. So there's, as in anything, there needs to be a balance.
Mhm.
So what's their incentive? What can we do to support them to justify more, a less discount, therefore higher net price? Um, and how is that communicated? So there's a number of things you can do there. One of the things, though, as I said, the principal thing is to reduce their authority level at that frontline sales level,
Mhm.
and give a little bit more to the next tier up, and final sign off at the revenue management level,
Mhm. Mhm.
or GM level.
Sure. I mean, I've seen also in a previous career, I've seen quite a lot of what I call counterpart frameworks. So you kind of look at all the discounts and why are we giving them? What's the counterpart we get in return or don't get in return?
Yeah, what's
And
the
and
quid pro
yeah,
quo, as they say?
exactly. And the moment you start labeling it, even if you don't do anything about it, but just start highlighting, we gave this discount or that rebate for this and this service or activity or performance level in return, it very quickly highlights where we are basically wasting a lot of money because 30%, 40%, 50% of all the discounts or the rebates we're giving is actually for no other reason than that this is what we gave last year.
No,
Um,
exactly, and it's the enforcement. So do we actually review those and say, well, that extra 5% I gave you was supposed to be a contribution to marketing.
mhm.
What additional marketing have you done?
Yeah.
Where is it?
Mhm.
If you haven't spent the money, then we want it
Mhm.
back. Should be the conversation. Most sales organizations aren't prepared to have those hard discussions with customers.
Mm.
A sales agreement is an agreement like any other, and it's a two-way agreement.
Mhm.
I give you this, but you give me that.
Sure.
And and I think one of the problems is that too often the sales team are engaging with the procurement team,
Mhm.
not with head
Mm.
of commercial.
Mm. Yeah.
In
Yeah.
which
Yeah.
case, you can have a grown-up conversation.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Well, we are getting towards the end, but maybe I have a final question around willingness to pay. Obviously, when we do work at Price Beam for consumer goods companies, it's all about willingness to pay, or at least it's very important, right? What are consumers willing to pay for different products? Do you think willingness to pay has a role to play in B2B?
Oh yes, absolutely. I don't think it's used or understood enough. And you and I have spoken before about, one of my frustrations is that B2B, and I said it earlier on, that tend not to invest in that type of research.
Mhm.
Um, I think it's very uh, it's a missed opportunity in B2B. And I think uh, uh, what one of the challenges in B2B is what value are you delivering? And willingness to pay is tied up in the value communication.
Mhm.
If you don't communicate the value well, the willingness to
Mm.
pay goes down. That's true in
Yeah.
B2C as well, of course.
Sure.
Um, but B2Bs generally don't spend enough time on that, communicating the value,
Mhm.
explaining where the value is, and certainly not enabling the sales organization, whether it be the remote support or the old school salesperson, physical salesperson. How can they adapt that story to that customer situation? And yes, more research would be a great help. The questions will be framed differently, of course. The
Mm.
outcomes will be objectives will be slightly different.
Sure.
But making the customer understand what they're getting through those questions. If I could deliver this, would you pay more? Those type of
Mhm.
questions um, are invaluable, and we should do more of it. Going back to my early experience in pricing, one of the things I did was actually physically visit customers and ask those questions.
Mhm. Ooh. Yeah.
Um, and so it was a small sample because I had to do it on my own, but it was really insightful. Because I'll tell you, if we could deliver this, would you pay more? Oh, yeah, absolutely. But we do deliver that already. So why
Mm.
wouldn't you pay more?
Mm.
Oh, I didn't know your product could do that. It can. So that was clearly our failure in
Mm.
not communicating it.
Yeah.
So that
Speaking with
changed
a
our approach to marketing as well.
speaking with a customer, what a novelty. Yeah.
Indeed, indeed.
Well,
I have
Barry,
to, I have to
thank you.
stop this radical thinking, you know.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for taking the time today, Barry. It's been very enlightening. Thank you so much for your time, Barry, and thank you to the
Thank you.
audience
My
as well.
pleasure. Been really
Thank you.
interesting.
Thank you.
Okay.
Bye
See you
now.
again. Bye bye.